Kia ora koutou, everyone. Welcome. My name's Kerry Charlesworth. I'm one of the psychologists here at the Cancer Society, although as you can probably see, I'm working from home. So today we're going to be talking about sexuality and intimacy, and this is a huge topic. And if you're feeling like cancer diagnosis or treatment, or even moving forward post all those things, that you have been impacted in some way in this area, this is really, really common. And I think that's why it's important that we start the conversation and have some form of resource for everyone that's being impacted by this to know that you're not alone. And here are some really practical strategies that we can go through, which hopefully relate to some area that you're having difficulty with at the moment. So I thought we'd open up with a Whakatoki, so a Māori proverb. Ke te kotahi te kaho ka whati, ke te kapuia e kore e whati. Alone we can be broken, standing together we are invincible. Apologies if my pronunciation wasn't perfect, but I'm getting there. I just really liked that proverb. I think it really embodies some of the things we're going to be talking about in terms of intimacy and, of course, some of the couples' work and information that I'll be going through. So this slide really is about how a really big chunk of people have rated sexuality to be moderate to extremely important for their well-being, for their relationships, on their health. A lot of research from the World Health Organization and a lot of other research domains have found the exact same thing, that this is incredibly important to our well-being, but a lot of people do not talk about it, do not seek help for it, don't feel like they can talk to the health professionals about it. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, sometimes it is really scary to talk about sex and intimacy with other people, but that it's okay to do that, and it is really important for our well-being. So we're going to do that today. What are we actually going to be talking about? So I'm going to start off by differentiating between sex and intimacy. And what do I mean by that? We're going to look at debunking some of those myths around that and the impacts of cancer on sex and intimacy. Then at the end, we're going to spend a good chunk of time looking at practical strategies to support an adjustment and connection. And part of that is looking at communication, especially for those of you that are in a relationship or partnership of sorts. This slide has a lot of things on it and the writing's really small, but I'll talk you through. Basically, this is looking at all the different elements that come under sex and intimacy. And if we just look at what is sex, well, there's lots of things that can fall under sex. It might be our sensuality, so the ideas we have around sex and intimacy, responding to stimuli, body image, fantasy. It might be sexualization, so the things we might do, the behaviors, flirting, messages, our sexual identity, so our biological gender or sex, who we identify as, our gender roles, our sexual orientation, and there might be sexual health and reproduction, so things like medical interventions and treatments that can impact our sexual health and reproduction, anatomy, physiology, our sexual behaviors and attitudes. And that is very different from intimacy. So under intimacy, we're talking about vulnerability, self-disclosure, trust, loving, sharing, caring. And all of these different elements of sex and intimacy are impacted by things like our values, the context to which we've experienced life, And all of that might begin at birth. And there's a really good slide coming up, which really takes the developmental model around sexual development and how that might differ from person to person. This is just a really fun kind of visual representation of sex. So our gender identity, our expression, our biological sex, and also who we might be sexually attracted to, but then who we might also be romantically attracted to. And that actually, it can be from a scale of nobody to masculinity or femininity. And you can see all the different scales there and how they don't necessarily all have to be the same. And a lot of people might struggle with the fact that one or two of them differ from maybe identity or attraction or how one might express themselves. So I think that's just a really, under the topic of sex and intimacy, I think that's quite an important kind of baseline when we think about what is sex and how we might identify ourselves. This comes back more to that developmental model. So the idea that we are sexual beings from birth until death. And I think this is a really important statement to kind of come back to, especially if for whatever reason right now there has been a loss in sexuality and intimacy in a relationship, or a loss of physical functioning to be able to be intimate with a partner at the moment, that I think it's important to come back to the fact that actually no matter what happens to us physically and what we might be able to do right now, we actually will continue to be sexual beings. And we'll talk about some practical strategies if that is resonating with you right now on how to move through that and those losses and changes in this area. But you can see at the beginning of the spiral, there's birth and there's love, trust, empathy. So a lot of that intimacy there. Our body image comes in, how we identify ourselves. So it's all interwoven from birth. Even if at that point you aren't obviously in a relationship or able to have intercourse or anything like that, you are still a sexual being, and that is part of our sexuality, is intimacy and what's built on through that. So I just rushed through little components of sex and what that means. And now we're going to move into more around intimacy and how does that differ from what I've just spoken about. So intimacy is more of a feeling of being close and belonging with another person, a familiarity and a connection. And when we think of intimacy, this might look like vulnerability, reciprocity, transparency. And so that's what I mean when I say intimacy versus sex, which might be all those other elements that I've spoken about. So I thought I'd share with you Esther Perel. If this is really interesting you or resonating with you right now, Esther Perel is a really great resource to go back to, especially if you are in a relationship right now and having some difficulties with that. So I'm just going to play a video of Esther Perel talking about intimacy in the modern westernized framework.
That the very thing that leads to conflict is often the very thing that we were originally attracted to. Every one of us here comes into this world straddling two sets of fundamental human needs. We all have a need for security, for safety, for dependability, for predictability, for belonging, for continuity. But we also all have a equally strong need, men and women and everything in between, for adventure, for novelty, for mystery, for risk, for the unknown, for discovery, for exploration. All of us, from the minute we come into this world, need to negotiate our need for security and our need for adventure, our need for connection and our need for autonomy, our need for togetherness and our need for freedom, our need for love and our need for desire. And many of you may have found partners for whom their proclivities matched your vulnerabilities, so that they can bring to you the parts that you want more of, or at least think you want more of, although many times you will then find them about the very thing that you chose them for. Because we all know that the very thing that leads to conflict is often the very thing that we were originally attracted to. For the first time, we are a lot more free, but also a lot more alone. And now, one particular word is going to change its meaning radically, and it's the word intimacy. In most of the world still today, intimacy generally means that we share the vicissitudes of the everyday life. We milk the cows, we feed the children, we deal with the droughts, we deal with the floods. But today, in our Western culture, intimacy is into me see. And into me see means that when I talk to you, my beloved, you better look at me in my eyes for the mirror neurons and no clicking away. When I talk to you and into me see, what is it that you're going to see is that I am going to share with you my most prized deep assets. And they're not my camels and my hurts, they are my feelings, my worries, my anxieties, my aspirations, my dreams. Into me see, I will open myself up to you to come in. And as you come in, you will validate me, you will reflect me, and you will momentarily help me transcend my existential aloneness. Welcome to Modern Love.
I will be giving handouts for you to find that link as well. But I think Esther Prowl does a really great job at kind of summarizing what do we mean by intimacy. And you can see that there's a lot more to being intimate with someone than just our potential physical interaction with them. So now we're going to move on to some myths, which I think is a really important part of supporting anyone that is having any difficulties with sex and intimacy. So the first myth is that sex just happens. It's easy. That's definitely a myth. Okay, so a lot of work you might do with couples in terms of intimacy might be helping couples to potentially plan time where they're intimate with each other, or that they might have some form of closeness with potentially planning intercourse or planning some form of sensual touch with each other. And some people go, well, actually that just takes out the spontaneity from it. It takes out the fun. But a lot of the time there's a whole bunch of barriers to being intimate with someone or spending that sexual time with someone. A lot of that might take planning, and sometimes that's what you might do on an individual basis when working with a couple, is actually planning that time together. And a lot of the theory behind this is that even when you plan a time during the week, that there's actually a sense that you begin to build anticipation, which actually feeds into this feeling of spontaneity. So the anticipation of spending that time with someone and And the more time you spend that time, because you're planning it and actually having time with your partner or even yourself, it builds that sexual drive potentially. So I think that's a really important myth to debunk, that sex just happens and we should always be on. But we know that there are lots of barriers to sex, and sometimes it takes the perfect storm to feel like you can actually be intimate on any level with someone. Sex is always fabulous. I think we always have these expectations that something should look a certain way or we should be a certain way. But sometimes sex just isn't fun. And, I think a lot of individuals can probably relate to that statement. The next one, you have to be young, look a certain way, or be healthy to have sex or be intimate with someone or yourself. Let's debunk that. Like we said in that developmental model, we continue to be sexual beings until we die. It is part of our well-being. It's part of who we are. And of course, there's individual differences in terms of behavior and how we might view sex and intimacy. But we certainly don't have to be young or look a certain way to have that. You should always lust after your partner. I think that's a really good one to debunk. We don't always have to be in the realm that kind of ties back to sex just happens. We don't always have to be in that space. Sex equals having an orgasm and intercourse. Okay, this is probably the biggest debunking one. So sex just doesn't just mean intercourse. It doesn't just mean an orgasm. Sex can be anything with intention of sexuality. So it could be oral sex, it could be self-touch, it could be it could be a whole myriad of things. Sexual touch. Sex doesn't just mean that you need intercourse or you need to have an orgasm. And I think the word sexual intention is a really nice one to come back to, because it takes the pressure off intercourse, it takes the pressure off performance or orgasms, and it comes back to, actually, if you can take that pressure off and lean into the word sexual intention, you might find that can be really helpful, but we'll go further into that in a little bit. Orgasms. So there's lots of myths that that men need to last long and women need to orgasm in a short amount of time. Actually, the average amount of time for men is 1 to 2 minutes, and actually men can orgasm without an erection. For women, if we're just looking at biological sex, so for women, it's often 1 minute to 15 minutes plus. So that's like the average, such a wide range. And I think that's an important one, because when we look at intercourse and being intimate with our partners, that might come through as a bit of a anxiety that, I should be able to orgasm sooner. Another myth is men always want sex, women don't. Not true. We're actually pretty on par, men and women, and whatever you identify with as well, that actually every individual is pretty on par with how much desire they might have. And again, it's very individual. There's also quite a myth around everyone else is doing it more than me or us. And I can't be intimate with my partner without intercourse and or sex. I think that's probably one of the main points of this talk today is there is a difference between sex and intimacy. We've defined those two things, and hopefully at this stage you can understand that you can still have that intimacy with your partner without having the sexual intercourse or even any form of sexual touch. And actually, when we look at the research, most people have intercourse for the feeling of feeling close to their partner. And that's where the intimacy comes in, that closeness, that bond with their partner. So most people, over 90% of people, and it wasn't gender diverse, everyone, every individual was the same, that actually they had intercourse with their partner. The main reason was to feel close to them. Wasn't anything to do with the physical pleasure or anything else. It was to do with that closeness with their partner. So I think that is really important to keep in mind, that we can still be really intimate with our partner if for whatever reason we can't have intercourse with them. Another really big element to this is what we might call a push and pull dynamic in a relationship. So where we're going to talk about communication in a little bit, where one person might have a higher sex drive than the other person, or one person, for whatever reason, they're not able to have intercourse, and they just kind of, there's a lack of communication, and so there's often this kind of push-pull partner discrepancy. And I think that's where the communication strategies that I'll talk about really come into play. So I hope that debunked a lot of myths for you, and kind of resonated with maybe some of the fears or anxieties you potentially might have when we think about sex and intimacy. So now we're moving on to, how does cancer impact on our ability to have sex and to be intimate with our partners? So like I said at the beginning, this is a really common theme. If we think about the biological realm, of course, surgery, pain, fatigue, fear, loss of general well-being. I mean, if you're not feeling well physically, that is the last thing that's on your mind. Treatment, hormone therapy, any sort of mental health. There's a lot of different biological reasons that cancer can impact our ability for sex and intimacy. Age and menopause can be a big one. And this is where I would really encourage, if this is resonating with you, I would really encourage to talk to your GP about the different things that are out there that you can do to support your ability to be intimate and have sex with your partner. So for women, for example, that might be using a daily moisturizer that can help with pain during intercourse, or even just everyday comfort. So, there are things there that it's worth talking to your GP about, and supporting you through whatever treatment you might be going through at the moment. Psychological, this is a really big element as well. Of course, body image, when we have losses and changes to our body, and physical functioning as well, potentially, that can have a really big impact on our ability to connect with our own bodies, but also potentially with our partner as well. Okay, and our relationship, there might be other things outside of an individual that is having an impact on intimacy. And I've mentioned a few of these words already. Our attitudes to sex, our expectations, performance anxiety, motivation and willingness, that might be really impacted by those biological things that I was talking about. For example, with hormone therapy, it's really common for the sex drive to be completely depleted, and there's just no motivation or even willingness to want to do that. And we can explore some of those challenges and barriers a little bit later. Relational, I just mentioned that interpersonal push-pull, where there might be discrepancies between a couple. Sexual and non-sexual touch, we'll go into that a little bit later. We might look at communication as well. And yeah, desire and negotiation as couple, which comes under communication too. So all of these things can really impact on sex and intimacy, and having a cancer diagnosis, going through treatment, or recovering from this, you can see how that potentially has a really big impact. So to bring what I've spoken about to life, I'm going to use some case examples. So I'll just go through one of them today. So this is all anonymous. So I'm going to say Mrs. X was diagnosed with breast cancer, and along with severe anxiety, was also finding intimacy with her partner difficult. X described intercourse as painful, but felt guilty and obliged to provide for a partner. So that's that push-pull dynamic I was talking about. X spoke about her partner being supportive for such a long period of time, and that they did not know that it was uncomfortable for her, and that she faked enjoying the experience. X described feeling resentful, disconnected, and overwhelmed with her partner. X also mentioned feeling butchered and could not look herself in the mirror nor touch her body. X described a strong avoidance to others touching her, including her husband. Okay, so I hope that this example really just brings to life everything I've already spoken about, and normalizes potentially some of these areas that you might be going through. So what did we do together? Obviously, we spoke about how this was quite a common experience. Encouraged her to see her GP, so Replant, Otrivine to help with the pain during intercourse, and we spoke about other things as well, like lubricant, but only using water-based. But those are things that really to talk to your GP or nurse about. We spoke about safe sex and what that looks like. So it's really important to know that you don't have to have sex if it's painful, unless that's something that is maybe in the fantasy realm. Of course, for some people that is there, but if it's something you're not enjoying, it's best to communicate with your partner and let them know that actually this is really uncomfortable for me. And when I spoke to this individual about if your husband knew that it was painful for you, do you think he would still want to have sex with you? And the clear answer was definitely not. And so it's about communicating. It's okay not to do it if it's painful. And you can really get into a cycle of having sex, it being painful, and then really your body, your desire, your intimacy immediately is really impacted, and most likely your body and your mind doesn't want to be intimate with your partner at all. And that might even go as far as not wanting to hug, not wanting to initiate anything with a fear of it turning to sex and it being a painful experience. So we had to strip this right back, go back to communicating with the partner, telling the partner how she was really feeling, building that trust again. And some of that started with her as an individual as well. So we did a lot of self-exposure and touch and self-compassion. So that might look like a hierarchy of exposure, which I recommend doing with a therapist, but it looked like just simply looking at herself in the mirror and doing some deep breathing. And then maybe the next step was doing the same thing, but with touch. And then the next step might have been getting her partner to touch that area and doing some deep breathing. So we call that exposure. And then self-compassion is, we can be really critical on what our body looks like, on our own expectations of ourselves. And it's kind of like, what would you say to a friend if your friend was saying, I feel butchered, I don't like the way I look, I'm awful? The words might be like, soothing, and it's okay, and you're still beautiful. And so we reflect what you might say to a friend to yourself. And that is kind of a very shortened example of what self-compassion work looks like. And then we did what's called sensate therapy, which is about building that communication and trust with your partner very slowly. It potentially starts with just a conversation about how you're both feeling, and then moving through getting booking in, and it sounds like quite structured, but planning and booking in time together as a couple. And that might look like non-sexual touch, so it might look like cuddle, hand holding, communicating, yeah, that feels really nice when you do that, massages, and then you might incrementally increase the amount of sexual touch, and you might move to erogenous zones and kind of increase as both couples feel comfortable. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in this slide. So on top of that increasing as a couple on sexual touch over a period of months, you might also set boundaries over that time. And this really helps with that push-pull dynamic. So you might say, this month, no intercourse at all. Or you can set your own boundaries as a couple. It might be, okay, for the next 3 months, no sexual touch, only intimate touch, so non-sexual touch, which might be massage of non-erogenous zones. So you can choose as a couple where you want to start, how fast you want to go. But I guess the biggest point here is around communication and setting some form of boundary, and both agreeing on that, and actually talking about your sexuality and intimacy with each other. A lot of couples don't have the conversation. So it's amazing, actually, the amount of people that I've worked with that actually just talking about how they're feeling was enough for them to resolve that difficulty as a couple. Sometimes, depending on the impact that the cancer has had on your sexuality and your functioning, that might be a slower process, and it might really be having quite strong boundaries, like, okay, no intercourse for 3 months, but we are going to slowly move forward in our sexual touch over time. And throughout that, it's an important part of the sensate therapy is to keep that communication open, to learn how to talk to your partner and let them know if something doesn't feel nice, but also tell your partner when something does feel nice. So you get to learn and connect with each other that way. And that forms not only the physical element, but it also forms intimacy. Remember, vulnerability, trust, communication, connection. So no matter what your sexuality looks like right now, you can still build intimacy if you're not able to have intercourse. And you can see how you can really build that using sensate therapy as well. Yep, so again, it's not linear. Build trust, communicate as a couple. You might plan time and anticipate rather than think, just expect it to happen and think it's going to be a spontaneous thing. So I might have a lot of individuals that say, I've had a penectomy or surgery, which means in this certain individual's case that there is no way that they could have an erection again. There was no way that they could have intercourse with their partner ever again. And that is a biological thing that is impossible. and they might say, what do I do? How do I move forward with this as a couple? And I think these two words really summarize kind of how to move forward, and that might be actively grieving the loss. So it might be grieving the physical change, how that impacts your relationship, how that might impact your body image, intimacy with your partner. That might not be something you can do with your partner ever again. And so there's a process of actually grieving that. We always grieve what's important to us. We don't just grieve in a bereavement sense. We grieve all of those different dimensions, and sexuality might be in there as well. It takes time to adjust to loss. It won't just happen overnight. And in terms of moving forward as a couple, this might look like negotiating what this now looks like for yourself and for you as a couple, talking about it, acknowledge the suffering as a couple. And then moving forward, it's being creative. How can I still be intimate with my partner if I can't have intercourse with them? And, again, setting boundaries might be in there. So you might have like a body map, and it might be, okay, for this example, it might be that the penile area is a red traffic zone, so no touching in that area. But actually, the upper body or behind the ears or exploring other areas for your partner are green light areas. So whatever context you're working with, I think that's quite a cool little tip, is to do a traffic light system for your body and communicate that way with your partner. But you can negotiate ways to connect and be intimate with your partner. It might look like non-sexual touch exercises. It might look like sexual touch, but that grieving and negotiating is really important to be able to move forward as a couple. Communication is a really, really big part of that, because you might think, okay, that makes sense, but actually, how do I communicate that with my partner? And sometimes with that push-pull dynamic, there's the sense of guilt or feeling like a burden to your partner, and there's a lot there. And I think communication within relationships is really important. So an example might be using reflecting what the other person has said to you. So this might look like, I understand that this is a really difficult time for you, and I'm hearing that you're wanting to be more intimate. So this might have come up if you're in a couple. And then you might say how you're feeling. So I feel, using the word I is really important. So not like you keep pressuring me. It might be like, I'm actually feeling like my sex drive is really low at the moment because I'm going through the hormone treatment, and I would really like to take things a little bit slower. And that might be communicating your needs. So I'm unable to have intercourse due to the pain. This makes me feel really upset. And negotiate both needs. So I understand you've got that need to connect, and then you might plan, okay, let's try this insight therapy out. Let's try planning it one day a week where we actually spend time being intimate with each other, and you might explain, do the red light zones with a body map, like my shoulders are green light, my legs are green light, but at the moment my breasts are a red zone and my tummy's an orange zone. That's okay. And so you can see how you can build that communication as a couple. And this little example, I think, is, if you're really stuck, is a really nice one to follow. There's also this video around communication, which I think is quite good.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way.
There's a little bit of humour there, but you can really see how in order to communicate with someone else, there's that vulnerability, but then there's also that sense of actually listening to the needs of your partner and actually just being there and hearing them. And I think that first statement in the example, like, I understand, it sounds like that's really reflecting to your partner that you are listening to them, and you're not just jumping to, well, you need to just take the nail out your head, or you need to just do this. So hopefully that gives you some tips on how to start communicating with your partner if that resonates with you. Okay. Oh, gone too far. Okay, so that brings us to self-compassion, which I mentioned a little bit about how you might talk to a dear friend, and that often we're quite really self-critical. And I think this is a really important part of the talk. We haven't really gone into detail around body image, which is a whole nother talk probably. But I think whenever you are having difficulty with a change in your body or a loss in how you might have been prior to, say, a surgery or a diagnosis, that exposure therapy paired with self-compassion can be really helpful. Even if you weren't going to speak with anyone, changing our thought pattern around self-compassion might be a really great start. So this is the last video, one more video around self-compassion and how you might be able to use self-compassion moving forward.
Hi, Kaz. Hi, Shelley. As you know, we are producing a course called The Power of Self-Compassion. So we're just talking to people today about how they treat themselves. Do you have a critical voice? And if so, what do you find it saying to you?
I definitely have a critical voice. I think everybody does. And I think they all start from when you're a kid. So, you know, I think all the things that my parents said, I hear, but it's normally about not doing a good job.
It's constantly stopping me as I try to complete thoughts or try to make steps forward.
It's a voice that always tells me that I'm not enough, or that I need to do better, or that there's something about me that I have to change.
When you fail or make a mistake, what types of things run through your mind?
I'm not worthy. Everybody's going to see my mistake. Nobody else makes mistakes like I do.
You're stupid. I can't believe you forgot something easy. This was basic. Why are you having so much trouble doing something so simple?
People don't want me around, that I'm uninteresting, boring, and or just too weird for people's company.
It says that I should have done better, and Sometimes it says mean words about myself.
It's probably the loudest thing that's usually coming through my head before anything else is at least ringing that failure over and over again.
And let me give you a scenario where a friend of yours comes to you, has made a mistake, and what would you say to that friend?
Well, the first thing I would tell them that it's okay. You don't need to feel all the weight of this.
Most likely you're holding on to this more tightly than anybody else.
This in no way, reflects your character or reflects your ability to do something. Definitely a lot kinder to my friends than I am to myself.
How do you think you would change if you used that same voice that you use towards your friends on yourself during those moments of failure and mistakes?
I think it would be, incredible because you're not going to talk to your friends the way that you talk to yourself sometimes. And I think that if you're constantly kind of reassuring yourself and letting yourself know that you are enough, then your thought process will change.
When you treat yourself like you do somebody else, you start feeling better, I think, right away, and you keep it in context much more instead of letting things be blown out of proportion.
I think I would have a lot less anxiety in my day-to-day. I think there would be kind of a weight lifted.
It would definitely make me feel better and happier, because when I usually say, when that voice that says mean stuff in my head, I'm not really happy and sad.
How could the world look differently if we were more compassionate towards ourselves?
I think the world would work better. I think through compassion and self-compassion, we all would just recognize that we're all human.
As a society, we could learn to love one another and show that love on a regular basis. I think that this world would be perfect.
There's a saying that if you love yourself, then you can love others. Well, sometimes I believe it goes in the reverse, and that if you can show that compassion that you show to others and bring it into yourself, I think that's where true growth can happen.
I think it would be magical. That's really the only word for it, magical, to be able to reflect on ourselves from a place of love rather than criticism.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an idea when I say the word self-compassion. And I really encourage you to give it a go, especially in the realm of one's body image. And that brings us to our final slide around some top tips and to actually encourage you to brainstorm, because if we actually stop to think about, actually, what are the things that I do currently or I've done in the past or that I could do that actually would improve my mood, my intimacy, my libido. And a lot of the times these are things like feeling tired, whether we exercise or not, the time, what we do with our time, self-care. So all of these things are really important to brainstorm for yourself, and everyone's an individual, so these might look different for you. But I think a lot of people might think with sex and intimacy and libido and body image that it's somehow a magically completely new intervention. But a lot of the time, the same things that might help with your mental health or your overall well-being will also impact libido and intimacy as well. So that might look like family time. It might look like looking at nutrition, looking at fatigue and sleep, linking in with health professionals around the topic, individual therapy. We offer free psychology sessions to patients in whānau and also couples here at the Cancer Society. It might look like self-care, exercise. Pink and Steel is an organisation that offers free sessions for those impacted by cancer. Cancer-free time, date nights, that's an important one. Anything to help with mental health. So we know that mindfulness, breathing techniques, relaxation can be helpful. There's a lot of different resources out there, and our website has some lovely webinars up around all of these different topics too, which might be worth having a look at. and also some audios for mindfulness and relaxation and breathing as well. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or you'd like more support in these areas. And really hope that you enjoyed the talk and got something out of it today, and look forward to connecting at some point. Kia ora.